Now, let's bring on the hate. I think this would have been a better story if this was not. Hello mortals, I am the BookTube Goddess, the #1 drag queen booktuber on YouTube. I had a great month for reading in October. October also marked 20 years that I've been with my spouse. 20 years. Obviously, we got together when I was 10 years old. But we were on the big island of Hawaii, and I brought several books to read on the beach on my Kindle. The Institute from Stephen King. The 2 books selected from Shelve It or Shove It. The Monster of Windhaven by Jennifer Geisbrecht and The Chilling Effect by Valerie Valdez. And finally, I also had time to read 2 extremely hyped books, Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, the duology by Leigh Bardugo. Let's start with The Institute by Stephen King. Now, I did watch A.G. McDonald's review of The Institute, which I'll link below, and he warned that there were some modern political references or metaphors to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, which took him out of the story. So I was braced for that, but honestly, it didn't bother me at all. Maybe because I was expecting more after seeing AG's review. Now, The Institute is the story of a boy named Luke with psychic powers, who also has a super genius IQ level. He is kidnapped by some mysterious agency that places him in an institute with other psychic children.
I got a bad feeling about this.
Now, one important aspect about the story is that Luke's IQ has nothing to do with his psychic powers. In fact, he has weak psychic powers compared to the other kids of the Institute. But can his IQ, can his smarts, can his raw intellect survive the extremely nefarious organization that is keeping him locked up? Now, I love the novel. I thought it was a throwback to some of the early Stephen King novels that I loved. In the Stephen King universe, Psychic Kids were always my favorite novels. Firestarter was one of my favorites, but also Carrie, The Shining. The novel started a little oddly, focusing on an ex-policeman named Tim Jameson, who was hitchhiking from Florida to New York and stopped off on a small town in South Carolina. His story has nothing to do with the main story of Luke until much, much later in the novel, when you do come back to Tim. But by that time, you've almost completely forgotten how the novel started. So it was an interesting choice. I personally think it would have been stronger if he just started with Luke, but you have to trust Stephen King knows what he's doing. Now, Stephen King's strength has always been characterization, and his characters are so detailed and real, and the plotting and pacing were on point. I give this novel my blessing. By the way, I was looking at my Kindle and noticed I had a copy of Dr. Sleep, which is now a movie, which I may go see. Let me know if I should see the movie. Is it any good? Have you seen it? Let me know in the comments. But I swear I have no memory of reading this book, and it was at 99% complete in the Kindle, which means I must have read it. So I don't know what that means. Has that ever happened to you? You come across a novel you've read but can't remember anything about it? Okay, let's move on. The next novel I read was the debut novel of Valerie Valdez called The Chilling Effect, a science fiction novel. Now, I picked this novel up based solely on the cover, and the cover is so cute. There are freaking kitty cats on the covers in space helmets. I was expecting a humorous, comical book just based on the cover and this little blurb. Kidnappers, alien emperors, psychic cats, and she's out of coffee. But no, it's not really a funny book. At least I didn't think it was hilarious, laugh out loud funny. But it is a lighthearted book. It doesn't take itself seriously, and there are some silly scenes. But pretty much, it almost reads like a detective novel. And I can't describe it more than that. You have to get a sample chapter from somewhere, and you'll know what I mean. The main character is Eva Innocente, captain of the spaceship La Sirena Negra. And she is basically a Latina version of Han Solo, basically. She uses her ship to transport goods, and sometimes maybe she's a smuggler. And the story opens where the purchaser of her cargo of psychic kittens goes bankrupt, and she is left holding the bag of cats. Now, spoiler alert, the psychic kittens don't play that big of a role in the novel. From the cover and the chapter, I thought this was going to be all about psychic cats, and I was really on board with that, but really it's not. So, what is the story about? It is about Eva's sister, and her sister is kidnapped, and Eva is blackmailed into doing some illegal or sketchy jobs. And the mystery is how these jobs connect to each other into some larger plot by this sinister organization. Now, what I did not like about the book was the pacing. Scenes and chapters stretched way longer than I thought was necessary. At times, I really felt the story got bogged down, despite the fact that there was a lot of action going on. I didn't like particularly some of the structure of her writing. Like, there was a long flashback that occurred in the middle of a chapter, which really just threw me and annoyed me. You know, if you have to have a flashback, put it at the start of a chapter. Now, there's one other point that's either is positive or negative, and only you can decide that. But there is a lot of Spanish in this novel. Now, you don't need to know Spanish to read this novel. Mostly the Spanish are curse words and little aphorisms. And I don't know Spanish, so I was using the Kindle Translate feature a lot. But I have a suspicion if you do know Spanish, you'll find this book a lot more amusing and entertaining. And by the way, Valerie Valdez is a Cuban American, and Eva Innocente is described as having a Cuban heritage. So I'm assuming the Spanish in this novel is very authentic. Now, should you call it one of those own voices novel? I don't know. The subject matter does not really deal with the issues of Cuban Americans. At least, I hope it doesn't. But it's an interesting sidebar to note. I actually wish there was more of an explanation of how this Cuban culture survived into the space age. Was there a Cuban settlement on a planet, or how did that happen? But that wasn't really explained. Anyway, I like the character. Eva has one of those tough exteriors, but a heart of gold. And I liked the writing, and I liked the story. I think this is a very strong debut novel, in my opinion. I give the novel my blessing. Next, I read The Monster of Elendhaven by Jennifer Griesbeck. This is a true anti-hero novel. Some people think they may like anti-hero novels when they're described to them, but then they find, maybe I don't actually like anti-hero novels because there is an issue with them. Think Grendel by John Gardner. Anti-heroes should be unlikable. Maybe they have some good qualities, or maybe they are sympathetic in some way, but they are villains. Now, Elendhaven is a fantasy horror novel. It takes place in the early industrial fictional city of Elendhaven, which was founded on the coast of a black ocean that had formed from some early dark supernatural disaster. It is very German-inspired, though it's a complete fantasy setting. Now, there are two main characters. Johann, who is the monster, and you don't know his background, and neither does he for that matter. He's dark, he's murderous, supernatural, and he has no morals. The other character is Florian, an accountant who is sickly and weak but has supernatural powers. He's secretly a sorcerer. So the story is about the relationship between Johann and Florian, and how their relationship evolves, what each of them wants from the world and from each other, and they are disturbing, dark, complicated characters. And they are unlikable characters. Whether you like this novel or not will depend on how important it is to you to like the main characters. Personally, I found them intriguing and I was drawn in, but I know that won't be the case for everyone. If being able to relate to a character is important to you, to get invested in the story, I think you may have trouble with this novel, unless you do relate to murderous characters.
In that case, you can stay away from me.
But can we talk about the writing? The writing itself is beautiful, evocative, clever. The story is dark and haunting. I give it my blessing. Just remember my warning, it is not a novel for everyone. Finally, I read the much-hyped duology by Leigh Bardugo, Six of Crows and The Crooked Kingdom. When I say hyped, I mean I've seen booktubers positively rave about these books. Now, I've never read anything by Leigh Bardugo, and I didn't know really much of anything about these books. I didn't even read the blurbs when I got them on my Kindle. So, much to my surprise, this turned out to be a story about a heist. It's a fantasy setting, and the main characters are thieves and rogues. The main character is Kaz Brekker, a criminal mastermind who puts together a team to break into a military facility to steal a scientist. Now, Six of Crows refers to the number of people in the team that Kaz forms. There's an acrobat, a demolitions expert, a Grisha, which is a person with magical powers, a sharpshooter, a soldier who is familiar with the military facility, and the leader, Kaz. 6. Now, just describing that makes me want to reread it. Oh, and the reason they are hired to steal the scientist is that the scientist can create a drug that turns the Grisha, the magical people, into weapons of mass destruction, and then those Grisha become spineless addicts. What makes this novel work, or these novels work, are the characters and their complicated relationships. And they're fascinating, and the story is fun. From love interest to extremely adversarial relationships, it makes the team really dynamic. Now, the writing itself is clean, and the pacing I found it really good. I was flying through the chapters. The first book is about the heist, and the second book is about the aftermath, or the consequences. I actually enjoyed the second book more, which I know is probably unusual. And I was extremely impressed by the author for giving us endings to each of the characters, and those endings I thought were necessary. Now, let's bring on the hate. I think this would have been a better story if this was not a young adult novel.
Say what?
The main character, Kaz, is supposed to be this criminal mastermind who spent years rising in the ranks of the criminal underworld with lots of contacts and ties. I mean, okay, sure, he's 17, really? He reads like he's in his 20s, if not his 30s. The entire team were supposed to be teenagers, but rarely did I think of them as teenagers. It was almost as if this was written for adults, but then the editor said, oh, this would sell better as young adults, let's just drop everyone's age by a decade. That's how it felt to me. Now, going back to the anti-hero business, some people may say Kaz is an anti-hero, but I would disagree. I think ultimately he's a hero. Yes, he's a flawed hero with a dark past, but in terms of story, I think he is a true hero. If you want to read about a real anti-hero, pick up The Monster of Elendhaven. Anyway, I enjoyed the duology, and they get my blessing. Now, here's the real question. Do these books live up to the hype? I don't know. I guess they do. I don't really understand why, even after reading them, I don't understand why they were hyped as much as they were. I guess they do. I'm not sure. I don't really understand why they got as much hype as they did. Now, don't get me wrong. They are good books. I like the books. But for the amount of love and hype they got, maybe I just sort of missed the boat on why that happened. Because even though I thought they were good books, I didn't think they were great books. Now, Six of Crows reminded me of another book, The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch, which is another novel about thieves. The main characters are thieves and in a dark setting. Now, I think The Lies of Loch Lamora has a much richer storyline, and I think it is better written. Now, I thought that was a great novel. That deserves a lot of hype. But Six of Crows, Crooked Kingdom, good books. I'll have affiliate links to all the books I mentioned below. Please like the video and subscribe if you haven't, and sign up for notifications and do all that stuff. Or don't do it. Up to you. Until next time, may all the books you read be blessed.